Welcome to the Move the Stairs, episode 74. We're recording on Tuesday, January 10th, 2023, and we are so happy you're joining us for today's conversation. We're excited to be joined by Jon Spadafora, the president of Veritas Fine Cannabis, a cannabis wholesaler here in Colorado. You know, Jon spent a couple of decades in the hospitality industry and then transitioned into the cannabis space. So he has a wealth of information about branding and marketing in this industry.
Yeah, we're excited to talk to Jon today. We're going to ask him about the importance of building customer loyalty, how you can manage that when we have such a competitive environment out there right now.
Yeah, something we're a big fan of. We're going to talk to Jon about as well, and that's educating the consumer and why it's so important in working toward building a very resilient CBD brand.
And then we're going to tap into Jon's expertise to hear what he sees on the horizon for cannabis, for CBD, for hemp, medical marijuana. Who's going to win the Super Bowl? No, we won't do that part. But all the other things, he will have some interesting things to share with us today.
So let's get started. Let's bring Jon into the podcast. Hey, Jon, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us. God, we're so happy you're here. And I'd like you to tell us a little bit about yourself first. Would you do that?
Sure, of course. My name's Jon. I am the president of Veritas Fine Cannabis. I'm also the head of sales and marketing. That was my first kind of job with the company. I was brought on in late 2014 to create the brand, way back in the day before we were being sold as white label at that time. I come from a background in hospitality. I have spent the better part of 20 years managing nightclubs, bars, hotels. I had a pretty successful consulting company where I was doing concept development for some pretty cool names in the hospitality world. Literally stumbled into a college friend of mine who was a partner in Veritas, and that's how my career in cannabis got started. But it's been great. It's been a super fun transition, and I absolutely love what I do right now.
I have to say, from 2014, you've been there a long time.
Yeah.
Sometimes It feels like it's been a day, and sometimes it feels like it's been decades. It's depends before the wind blowing. We make jokes that the highs are very high and the lows are very low in this world. It's very
absolutely
startup world.
Yep, absolutely. I can see that. So Veritas received the first wholesale license in Colorado. What does that mean? Tell me why that was important.
So as the legal weed industry was growing up, specifically in Colorado, initially they wrote the rules so that they wanted stores to be producing their own product, and they would sell through their own stores. We were the first license that was not attached to a store, meaning that we were solely wholesale. We had to do something with our product that we felt would allow us to separate ourselves, because we didn't have a set of stores that were going to be selling our product regardless. We had to make people want it. So that's what it means. We were the very first license in Colorado that wasn't attached to a store.
Got it.
Well, that's fascinating. Jon, we're so happy to have you on the podcast to record. We have three primary pillars, we call them, when it comes to brand protection PR. And one of them is building customer loyalty, which we know in the cannabis space can be really difficult at times. I mean, whether it's CBD, cannabis, or medical marijuana, hemp, it can also be thrown into that as well. What are some keys to kind of making yourself stand out amongst your peers in the crowd so that you might, work toward developing some of that customer loyalty?
You hit it right on the head. For all of those businesses you spoke about, we don't have the normal tools that a lot of businesses have available to them. We've had to learn how to connect with our customer in an environment where our Instagram account can just be pulled from us. We had a year where we had 3 different Instagram accounts pulled down. We had 100,000 followers worth of accounts just disappear. And that was, at the time, our primary method of communicating with the customers. So what we did is we tried to identify ways we could better communicate with our customers that were company owned. We invested very heavily in our website, invested very heavily in a PR campaign, but in a way that what we really sought was the opportunity to tell our story. And we've always been of the belief that because of the methodology we use and the kind of core principles that started this company, it was just a matter of sharing information that people valued the most. What's in this? How? What will this? We really focus on terpene education, right? So our products are first selected, strains are selected based on the terpene content, and our grow style is made to maximize that. Our post-production processes are all driven by terpene preservation. And then on the sales side, we really focus on educating the consumer so they can find what's right for them, all the way down to, I think that we're still, as far as I know, the only wholesale brand that's figured out how to identify where our products are every day. So you can go to the Veritas website and have a strain that you're looking for, maybe sour diesel. You can type in sour diesel and actually see a list of stores that have that on the menu this morning, which was a pretty kind of critical way. And so again, all this was about finding ways that we could communicate with the customer on our own terms and answer the questions that were most important to them without losing those vehicles, because we didn't, especially in the beginning, have the ability to do Google ads or the traditional methods you would market products with. So I think that the positive of that is it forced us to really try and find ways to meet the customer where they were and to communicate with them in that space. And we always took the approach of doing it not in a way that was preachy or salesy, but just educational. This is what we're doing. Here's information if you'd like to learn more. And for us, that's been a very effective tool towards establishing a real conversation with our customer that's more than just only when we have something hot or only when something goes bad. It kind of is all those things and more.
Yeah, good input. You mentioned, John, you've been in this space since 2014. So you know that cannabis consumers in particular, they seem better educated today than they were maybe 10 years ago or so. So is that continuing education? Is that still useful in building a customer loyalty, a customer base? Because I know a lot of the small businesses may be, gosh, I am so swamped. I don't know if I have time for this, but it's important, isn't it?
Oh, I think it's critical. And it's funny you touch on that. My business partner actually had kind of a revolutionary statement internally, but it was a couple of years ago. And he was like, right now there's more people the people who buy our product have only known buying this product legally. They're most of their life, or a good majority of them, have spent this time growing up with weed, where they're going into stores, talking to bud tenders and forming opinions about what they like, in the same way that any of us do if you discover wine or whiskey or one of these kind of nuanced products that if you really dive into Pinot Noir and you understand the Willamette Valley, you're like, okay, I get it. I understand why it's more expensive. This is really kind of phenomenal. So many of our consumers, because weed's been legal in Colorado for 8 years, have been going into stores and talking to bud tenders and smelling jars. We kind of got away from how I used to buy weed when I was in college, which was from someone who had it. And, hopefully it was what they lived up to. And if it was, you bought it from them again. If not, you went somewhere else. We're now dealing with a consumer base that's starting to understand what they want. And we're dealing with a community and I think a knowledge base that is understanding the plant and the product in a much better way, in a much deeper way. So the expectation, I think, is that brands are going to be able to communicate more and be able to explain what they're doing and why and what those effects should be. Which I think is a great thing. I think it's good for brands. I also think it's really good for the consumer because it's just making us all be better.
Absolutely. And I would think that that communication really involves outreach to the community. So do you think it makes difference to the consumer if your brand collaborates with, say musicians or community events or charities for that matter?
Yep. We consider all those to be part of what we call our influencer strategy. So, I don't believe in the kind of online paid advertiser and it's someone whose Instagram feed is just constantly full of ads. Instead, we're very fortunate that we produce a really good product and that we've got a brand that has a high level of connectivity with the consumer. And what we do is we look to involve ourselves with people who we think are influential for our customers, and that could be sometimes as an artist, and it could mean that we sponsor someone to go and put murals in a couple of locations. It could be that we commission art for our annual ski giveaway, and then we will repurpose that for merch in a few areas. And it really kind of provides some exposure for an artist, but we really seek to interact with that individual and become part of their sphere. And it's not just hey, do this for me so your people know about us. We want to become part of that lifestyle. We've done that. This is our 4th year of giving away skis in the wintertime. So we do a run of custom skis with the best local ski manufacturer, Icelandic, bring in a different artist every year. And we create an environment where there's a velocity with the product now and it's not just that we're giving something away, it's you're really connecting with the outdoor sports community, with, kind of Colorado in general in the wintertime, with fans of those artists. And people see that that's a really meaningful contribution. And I think we take that exact same approach in everything we do. Last year we did a collaboration for 420 with Oscar Blues, the brewery. And that was intentional. You know, we feel that there's a high amount of overlap for people who value high quality beer and people who value high quality cannabis. And so we worked with the Oscar Blues team to really seek a real overlap for where these products connected. And what we found the overlap was that both the flavor of high quality beer and the flavor of high quality weed are driven by terpenes. And so they created a beer that had a very similar terpene profile to a couple strains that we had. And that was a great example, I think, of just not really marketing, but just trying to connect with the consumer where they were.
You're building a relationship there. And I love the fact that you're really focused on the terpenes too. I mean, you know exactly what it is that's differentiating you. So that's huge as far as building that customer loyalty.
100%. We also, I think the way that we categorize our product, I'll show you, we've, based on the terpene test, we test everything that we put out. And so if you look at the jar, there's this kind of stripe on it. We've got the categories that are based on what those terpene profiles are. And the basic idea is that we run so many strains and the likelihood of electric lemonade being available the next time you go to the store is, you know, not necessarily there, but we try and categorize based on similar terpene profiles so that the consumer can find what they're looking for. And I think ultimately that's what it comes down to. When I first got here, I'll never forget, we had just moved back to Denver. We were at Red Rocks with some friends of mine. And my wife, who at the time smoked very little weed, and she's still not a huge consumer, especially compared to me. I didn't understand it well enough, and I got her the wrong strain. And we were watching the Whalers and, you know, sharing a joint with some friends. About 5 minutes later, she's in a really bad place. And we spent the majority of that concert at the top of Red Rocks kind of talking her out of where she was at.
Right.
And for me, as someone who was just kind of re-engaging with weed in the level that I was, this was very early in the brand, it was really apparent that we needed to do a better job of communicating with the consumer what this may or may not do with them. And because terpenes and cannabinoids are so personal, you know, what it does to Mitch or what it does to Jordan might be different. Right. But one thing that is consistent is how those terpenes will affect you individually. So we try and put all that information out there. So for the consumer who really wants to understand, you know, you can follow the things that are help you to get where you want to go.
That's great. And it just builds trust. And that's what you're really after when it comes right down to it. It's the bottom line. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, it goes back to communication. Of course, it's something we're very near and dear to. So that brings us to our next segment. We call this Insider Media Relations here at M&C Communications, because as we mentioned, we're all former journalists. So we use those experiences of ours over the years to prepare clients to take advantage of any kind of media opportunity that may come along by positioning them really as an industry leader, an expert, a spokesperson, large or small, who can give some great interviews and help communicate those important messages.
Yeah, I think it's important.
So with all that, it is. And, you know, with all that being mentioned by Mitch, you know, John, we'd love to hear, you know, your opinion on the importance, you know, for brands large and small, of sharing its story with the media and the public. And I think you already mentioned this a little bit, how you talked about your social media struggles and turned to your website and used, you know, your own content. That is what you produce on your website to reach out to your consumers. So what role does that play when reaching out to the media?
So I think it's incredibly important to have a fluid and honest conversation with the media. You know, the reality is, and this last year is a great example of it. I mean, we are the largest brand in Colorado by shelf space, by, you know, sales from a wholesale perspective. I think last I checked, we were on 32% of all shelves. The next closest flower brand was like 17%.
Wow.
There's a lot of good that goes into that. There's also a lot of attention that comes on that. And when something bad happens, you know, it creates everybody wants to talk about it, right? And it's an important thing to, I think, embrace and to take hold of. What we learned this last year is that we try to make very thoughtful decisions. We try to make very intelligent decisions for the business. And sometimes that means doing things that you don't want to do. We had to close a facility over the summertime. And with that closure, that was a response to the market contracting. Right. And the reality of, for a period of time, the state was producing much more product than it needed. And in order to preserve the brand, we needed to contract the amount of product we were putting out. And so, you know, unfortunately that involved, I think we had to lay off 34 different individuals, which is a very challenging time to do. We approached that specifically of, let's tell our story and explain what happened. You know, the reality is, this is brutal. You know, we know that we were a focal point for the market. With that kind of distribution, it comes a lot of attention. And when we closed the facility, it was a public thing. It got picked up by multiple newspapers. It got picked up by lots of industry trade. And we took the approach of, look, let's just get out and tell the story. At the end of the day, I think what it accomplished is it allowed us to humanize the brand a little bit. We were very honest about the feelings and about kind of the decision process we went down. And, I think that from a regaining or maintaining credibility with our staff as well as with the market, I think that people responded really well to that. So from an engaging with the media standpoint, we always just try and take a very honest approach. We wanted to get out in front of things. We want to talk about the good. We also want to talk about the bad. And the advantage of that, as you kind of alluded to, is that you start becoming this perceived industry expert, which I always joke around. I had the pleasure of speaking at a couple of conferences this year, and I'm still not mature enough to not drop an F-bomb on stage every once in a while. But I think it's kind of that honest approach that makes it engaging. And so that was the same. We went through some bad shit. This world is a tough world right now, and it's going to be that way for a lot of businesses. So I think that facing those problems head on and confronting them and understanding that you got to do something to get around is important. And I think that taking that approach, at least from the majority of the consumers, appreciated the fact that we were open and honest about it. And I know from an employee standpoint, we had very honest conversations with our staff. This is where we're at. This is what we're doing. This is why we're doing what we're doing. This is what the plan is. Not to say that plan doesn't change from time to time. This world moves quite a bit, but to be focused on it has been a good thing for us.
I love that, because I think it is so important. And I would say you're unique in the people that we deal with, who that you're willing to take on those negative stories as well, because it really does build your credibility. It builds what we call that trust bucket. And it builds it not only with the consumer, but I think it also builds it with the press. What I'm interested in, though, is my guess is there's a lot of members of the press. And as the industry is continuously researching and there's new information, they're just not well educated on whether it's CBD or hemp or marijuana or medical marijuana. When you're talking to the press, how do you best educate them so that they come away with a good story, but you also know that they have a better idea of what they're talking about?
Sure. No, that's a fantastic question. And I honestly think that if you look at how this business is evolving, and there's different rules in every state and there's different rules in every jurisdiction, there's different definitions. Medical marijuana in Canada means something very different than it means in America with respect to how it's approached and processed. I think it's important for us all to keep in mind that the rules are changing every day. So we're all teaching each other constantly. What we try and do is give a very honest backstory of who we are and why we are where we are. Right. And I think that we do a pretty good job of keeping the fundamental story very consistent, which is about the quality of the product and the terpenes, and that being a driving force on why our product is a different product for the consumer. And I think that the story of how we produce that really just kind of walks down the road of our interpretation of cannabis and why we believe it is the way it is. So I don't know if we're necessarily educating them on the larger world, but I think that we've certainly become we've got a great rapport with a few different publications now, and I think that I don't look at it as much as we're educating them. I think it's a back and forth constantly. That from the press standpoint, we're still a single state operator. We're launching our first licensing partner in about a month, and then we've got an additional kind of partnership project that'll come later this year. But from most of my standpoint, we're really a single state operator, and being in that single state operator, the press gives us viewpoints into how other people are handling things. I always love to ask the question. You talk to a lot of people, what are they doing in California or Michigan that you don't see us doing that you think is helping the people? Because I think that viewpoints into all these different markets is just important for us all. We're in a silo as a cannabis operator, and I think the same thing on the CBD hemp side. It's muddy with how you can get advice and where you can communicate. So the more information we can share is the better. So long way of saying, I think that we're all educating each other, and I think it's going to be that way for a minute. This is still a business that's very much in its infancy.
I agree.
Keeping those channels open was key when you were talking there, because then you are able to not only learn more yourself, but perhaps pass on some pertinent information for those people who are writing or are talking about this.
There's been a good thing as you look at this last year, and the economics of the business have changed significantly. One thing that I really enjoyed is that it's opened the flow of communication amongst brands. People who we consider to be our top competitors There's been times we've been faced with things and I've had people reach out and be like, hey, if you need anything, I've been through some similar stuff, let's talk about it. And then conversely, I've had people just randomly reach out to me and say, hey, we're going through X, Y, or Z. Have you guys ever seen something like this? And that's a relatively new thing. I think that it comes from, and it's from the press, and it's also from competition. It's like, as a group, we're all trying to figure out the right way to continue to move forward and see positive gains.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of journalists, a lot of media platforms out there to choose from. And rather than some just shotgun blast to get their attention, what advice would you have for a business owner when it comes to choosing the right reporter to reach out to at that right time?
That's tough because I kind of am lazy on here. We have a phenomenal PR team that we use, and they are very, very, very engaged with a multitude of reporters. So, from my standpoint on the business side, we try and focus on doing what we do best and really allowing experts to carry the day, whether that's in our own space and trusting the sales team when they're talking about, we get down to the end and we have to talk about pricing on a product, or trusting the gut of the QC expert at our facility, even if it represents, making a decision that's economically not good for the business. And I think the same thing, as I look towards a press standpoint, I put a lot of faith in our PR partner to make sure that we're putting ourselves in situations that we'll be able to tell the story properly. And I think that it's get the story out and wide and be honest with it, but we know we need to vet and have the right experience as well, so that nothing gets twisted around. And that's where I think we rely really heavily on our partners. I wish I had a better answer. I don't know how to do the vetting, so hopefully you guys aren't here to crucify us, but it's
No, I like the fact that you rely on your PR firm. That's good.
Yeah, I think you look people in the eye and be honest too. That's I do every interview with video when possible, because even if we're on a phone, let's just have a conversation. At the end of the day, my ugly mug doesn't really add a lot to the thing, but it lets people know that we're engaged and we're paying attention to it. And I think that's important.
I'm not thinking it's so ugly anyway, but that's an aside. Anyway, so CBD and cannabis business owners, are constantly on the lookout for ways to strengthen their business, whether they're threats to the bottom line and their reputation, because those and with all the reasons going on, there's another shoe to drop, but at the same time, we're right now, we finally have. We help clients find the opportunity in every challenge and really try to polish those reputations and prepare for the unexpected. And that's how we build resilient brands.
Yeah, and I think Diane broke up there a little bit, but I think, John, you got the gist of it here. And that's kind of going to be the third part of our conversation is, working toward some of that brand resiliency. So, my question for you is to break out your crystal ball. I don't expect you to pick the Super Bowl winner, like Mitch alluded to earlier. But we're curious, now that we're in 2023.
I hate to say it.
He's on the record now.
I consider it to be.
All right, you heard it here first.
It's one of the greatest mistakes that John Elway ever made in the Broncos' head, to let Josh Allen get away from under our nose from a program that was never on TV. And the dude, you just have to. If the Broncos aren't in it, that's who I'm cheering for. So I'm picking Bill.
There we go.
All right.
We'll see. I am a Broncos fan. All of us on this podcast are. So I think we're all feeling that little sting every year that we see them in the playoffs and not in orange and blue. But we'll get the train back on the tracks here. We're good at getting the train off the tracks, by the way. It's not just you, so don't worry about it.
It's me. I apologize. I am the master of that.
Yeah. We're safely entrenched in 2023 now. So you've got to be looking toward the future. What issues are you looking at in the cannabis space, good and bad, that you're focused on, you think other business owners are focused on? Because as you mentioned earlier, oftentimes because the industry is in its infancy, you're collaborating with other folks in the industry saying, here's how I can help you. Whereas they may be reaching out to you saying, here's my experiences too. So what are you focused on here?
I think that for the last 7 years, all that we've known was expansion. We've never known being able to grow enough. We've never been able to put out enough. We had a run of, I think, over 3 years where the inventory sold out before Monday afternoon. It was incredibly, incredibly fast. And there was a lot of people in this business who had that same approach, and we're seeing the same set of results. And as we've gotten into a very unique world where the cost of everything in my life, except for cannabis, has gone up, there's very few things that have not gotten more expensive, but cannabis is one. And for I think there's a bunch of reasons around that. we have been focusing as a business. In fact, right now we're revising our 2023 business plan again to really say, okay, well, what's most important to us? The quality of the product in the jar, the quality of the engagement with the consumer, and that engagement leading to a product that the consumer will go to the store and buy. And we've challenged our leadership team to say, let's look at everything we're doing and understand that we have to be much more methodical with our spend at this point in time. We still want to maintain that brand engagement, and certainly we want to maintain the quality. But we built a brand based on hand touch at every point, which is fantastic. But that's also creates challenges, right? So as a brand, we're really focused on understanding that the world economy has more to do with, it has a tremendous impact on us and all these other things, and saying, okay, we're at this final spot. Let's tighten up. Let's make this business better. Let's make it stronger foundationally, so that when we get through this, we will be able to appreciate the spoils of that. And so I think that that's what we're doing. I think that's what a lot of other cannabis brands are doing. We're looking at ways we can diversify our menu intelligently and make sure that we're proud of every product we stand behind that we put out. But it's where do you make intelligent decisions? Because it's the world is very different than what it was a year ago. I mean, literally our January 22 and January 23 could not be further polar opposites. And at the end of the day, I think this is going to be the great growing up. It's going to impact us. It's going to impact a lot of other brands, because the ability to just expand and continue to feed that machine is no longer here for the time being. And so I think that's where you'll see some really intelligent decisions, whether that's in your marketing spend or anywhere else. I'm not a proponent of chopping marketing spend. That's typically the first thing that happens. But we've been able to maintain price and distribution, and that's a function of continued engagement with the consumer. So it becomes, how do we become smarter, and make sure that we continue to be incredibly proud of what we're putting out, both from an experience and from a product standpoint.
Yeah, it's constantly evolving.
Yep.
One of the other things we're talking about creating a resilient a brand is we talk about keeping your business in a position or your leadership to be interviewed for stories when things come up, good or bad, and when it arises, and keep those channels open. Are there any things that you found really work best to help your business position yourself as a thought leader now, so then when the media does need a source, you're one of the first people they think of?
I think that you hit it right on the head, and I think it's making yourself available. And it's that, I've done interviews on a Friday afternoon at 4:00 headed into Memorial Day weekend because an opportunity came up that was worthwhile. I think it's just important to make yourself available and to maintain the consistency. And I think for us, that's always been easy because the story is just the story, and we're not telling a story. This is kind of just sharing the facts. But I found that being available when people needed information has led to opportunities where we need to get information out. People are much more engaged from that side. So I think it's obviously everything's a push and pull, and we want to make sure that there's value in it from the reporter standpoint. If they want to get a story and we think there's a way that we can speak to it, doing that early and doing that consistently, and also doing that with multiple individuals. We've got, I think, 6 or 7 people who represent us in the media right now, which is important because this isn't my story. This is our story, right? And this is something where, we've got a lot of really great people in a lot of places who are leading to the success that we've enjoyed. So I think that also has been pretty important for us from a media standpoint, is that having multiple points of contact. And it's like, you've got an expert or two in the garden. You've got, our logistics front of house vice president is absolutely amazing. And he can speak to, a lot of a very specific type of articles that he's had a lot of placements. So I think that's also really important, is just open it up and don't make it all about one person or one skill set. Make it about what this brand stands behind, and the multiple people who can speak to that has been helpful for us.
It does, spreading it around. I think that's really important. And I was very interested earlier when you talked about you're very comfortable, even if it's a negative news story, because that's not what we hear a whole lot. It's like, in fact, it's sometimes the fear of a lot of business owners is, I don't want to be the person that's out there, because when the negative news happens, I'm going to be the one that they call.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So how do you suggest business owners handle the press in those situations? And do you think that there's a way, is there something that you use so that you can take that negative and turn it into a positive? I'm interested to hear what you do.
Well, first of all, it's never fun, right? And so I think it doesn't necessarily get easy, but I think that what we realized is that you get to a spot where the story is going to be told. And you have a decision about whether you can help to influence and tell your side of that story or not. And I think that as a brand, it's we learned this early, right? There was a situation many years ago where an influencer went and found some product that didn't meet standards and contacted us, and the response to them wasn't maybe as engaging as we would have liked. And that turned into a pretty negative situation. And what we learned is that, look, when something goes wrong, we're going to own it from the very beginning. And that led to our company adopting a very kind of Costco, Nordstrom style return policy. If you open an eighth and see a seed in it, please let us know, because we'd like to make that right. And I think that, having that humbleness to listen to what we were actually hearing, and then step back and say, okay, well then, what are we going to do about this? How do we fix it? How do we make it so it's a learning experience as opposed to just a negative press opportunity, right? And so, I also think that just being honest, at the end of the day, as long as the story is the story, and you take this approach, we try and keep a very even keel. We don't carry a huge ego into the conversation when we do well or when we do bad. And that's, I think we're getting to we've achieved a spot where the media often appreciates that now, and they understand this isn't going to be braggadocious when we're winning. And I think that maybe they're more open to just getting the real story than when something goes wrong as well. And
humility goes a long way, doesn't it? I mean,
it does. And I think the other side of it is that not having that happen in a vacuum. Like if something goes wrong, we then seek to address it as an operation, because I don't want to deal with that one again, And so I think that kind of transparency is really evident internally, because we talk very frequently throughout the organization about problems, whether that's a consumer complaint we saw, something our internal team is witnessing, or a process that's not working the way that we'd hoped it would. And that's from the garden through the kind of supporting the store's sales channels. We try to have very open conversations about those things.
I love that.
Yeah, that's just a fantastic answer. And I think you broke it down really nicely for all of our listeners here. So, Jon, fantastic interview. We cannot thank you enough for joining us on the Move the Stairs podcast. Before we let you run, can you let all of our listeners know where they can find you, where they can find Veritas products?
No, of course. And thank you for having me. This was a blast. I really enjoyed the time. We're available across the state of Colorado currently, pretty much everywhere. So if you go to veritascannabis.com, there's a store locator. Like I said, we actually have technology. We're scraping store menus daily and updating that. So one of the unique features we have is you can actually find the specific product you want that's closest to you. Very proud of that one.
That's very cool.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much, Jon. I appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
That was great.
All right.
I mean, I love that. Yeah. There was so much in there. I love the fact that he was talking about how he used his own media and was not relying so much on social media when he was talking about building customer loyalty and developing that relationship, whether it was through community outreach or through influencers with his customers. I think that that's really, really important, because you have to have that element so that you can be consistent, because that's what they want, is consistency if you want the loyalty.
Yeah. I think that was interesting when we were talking about the area of insider media relations. He talked about keeping those channels open, because I know a lot of small businesses go, oh, the media, I'm afraid of them. Where, of course, we teach them here at M&C to work with them. And it really is a discourse about all of us learning, especially at a business like this that's ever changing. So the fact that he was keeping those channels open, keeping that conversation open, then when something really good happened, who did they think of? Well, one of them would have been Veritas, because he'd already established those connections.
Right, exactly.
And why those connections were established is because Jon talked about the importance of making yourself available. Yes. And I love how he referenced, hey, I've gotten calls to do a media interview at 4:50 on the Friday leading into Memorial Day weekend. And hey, I did it. I did that interview. And I think that goes a long way toward building thought leadership and a resilient brand. So whether it's CBD, medical marijuana, hemp, it's a great blueprint to building those relationships with reporters, because, by the way, you're bailing them out too if they're heading into Memorial Day weekend when they know there's absolutely zero chance they're going to get a hold of anybody they want to talk to. So I thought that was fantastic.
Yeah. They will appreciate that, and remember that too. I know, as a reporter,
we've all been in those shoes. In that.
Oh yes, absolutely. I'm going to do what this late, this hour? Yeah, you got to find somebody.
Yeah.
Well, we want to thank again our special guest, Jon Spadafora, today, the president of Veritas Fine Cannabis, for joining us on the Move the Stairs podcast. We thank you as well for listening, and we'll hope you'll join us again soon for our next all-new episode of the Move the Stairs podcast.